Science Gallery Bengaluru's first physical event since the outbreak of the pandemic. So the last physical event that we closed was in fact in this very space, when we held our first major exhibition season on water called Submerge. We closed that in January of 2020, and then here we are, almost 2.5 years later. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome you all in the same space. It's a nice beginning to pick up where we left. And the Bangalore International Center has been a foster home for us as we grow into our role. So for those of you who are not yet fully familiar with Science Gallery Bengaluru, we are a public institution for research-based engagement with knowledge, with the sciences, so human, social, and natural sciences. Our own building is nearly ready, and hopefully we'll be able to welcome you soon in our own premises, starting later this year. During the pandemic, we've continued to program, so we in fact held 3 of our exhibition seasons online. As a young institution, that was also something of a learning for us to go online and engage with young audiences, but also audiences not just from India, but also from abroad. We are a part of an international network of galleries. We have sibling galleries, 4 in Europe, 2 in the United States, 1 in Australia, and ourselves. In the network, we are somewhat of an exception because we are the only independent gallery. And we work very closely, or we are founded by the government of Karnataka, but we work very closely with the Indian Institute of Science, the National Center for Biological Sciences, our second, or rather I should say our first foster home, and the Anshishti Institute of Design, Art and Technology. So here we are. Welcome again. And as for this evening's program, allow me to say a few words about it. Art and Industry is a collaborative effort between ourselves, Science Gallery Bengaluru, and the Glyn Vivian Art Gallery, Swansea, Wales. Our project seeks to explore the historical, industrial connections between India and Wales, sometimes through ideas, sometimes through concepts, but also sometimes through empirical material, and reflects the many entanglements between the histories of mining communities, industry, and art. Art and Industry is funded by the Connections Through Culture India-Wales grant scheme of the British Council in India and Wales, and is supported by Wales Art International to develop co-creative projects between artists, art organizations, and festivals. Our program and content partners for today are, of course, the Bangalore International Center and the Museum of Art and Photography. Today's panel discussion, Black Coal, White Cube, brings into focus the complicated presence of coal in the lives and labor of artists, writers, and mining communities. This is a part of our larger exhibition season, the next one that we will be opening, which is called Carbon. With this, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's evening, Shravanti Bagchi. It's a huge pleasure to welcome you. Shravanti has been a feature writer and editor for over 20 years with publications such as The Telegraph, Business Standard, DNA, and The Times of India. She was culture editor of Factor Daily, a niche cultural digital publication focusing on technology. Some of us in Bangalore know about it, more than probably elsewhere, and its intersections with society. Currently, though, we see her much more in the news because she's the national features editor at Mint, where she writes on business, art, culture, and technology. There'll be a question and answer session following the panel, so do keep your questions ready. That's the spot meant for that. So over to you, Shravanti, and take over the evening. And your co-panelists will be joining you shortly. So.
He's done extensive work on the socio-political issues around mining. Ronnie Sen is a well-known photographer who has done extensive work around the mines in Jharkhand, photographing the lives of the miners and the conditions in the mines. And Chantamani Mudaya is a very well-known sculptor, and much of her work is around sustainability and carbon as a material to work with. So when we were first, told that we would be participating in a discussion about art and industry, it was a bit of a, broad sort of a topic. We weren't really sure, what exactly we were supposed to be talking about. But as we held conversations before this, among all 5 of us, along with Janvi, it became clearer. And I would just like to begin by talking a little bit about, the title of today's session, which is Black Coal, White Cube, which is, the black coal is very clear. It's obvious that we are talking about coal. And, since mining is a large part of the conversation today, white cube, of course, represents the white, the most dominant metaphor of the art gallery, right? It's the white cube space. And it's, I think, a fantastic title because it says a lot without saying too much. So, basically when we talk about art and industry and the confluence and intersections between mining and art, what do we really mean? I thought this particular line from an article about artist Prabhakar Pachpute, who has worked extensively, who's done a lot of work in the he comes from a family of miners himself, and a lot of his artwork is focuses on mining. So this was a journalist, Uma Nair, writing an architectural digest about Prabhakar Pachpute's work. And what she says is, charcoal is more than a medium, as well as a metaphor here. It is an allusion that references the selfish code of utility of the mining of coal, land usage, and the ultimate abandonment of mines. So those are some of the broad themes that we will be touching upon today. But feel free to go off script and talk about your experiences and your practices. So we'll go around and talk to each of these writers and curators and artists about their work and how it sort of combines the themes of art and industry. So when we talk about art and industry, historically, it has always been, sort of hagiographic. Initially, in the days between the world wars, there were commissioned paintings of trains, of shipbuilding, which were essentially meant to glorify industry. And art has always sought the patronage of industry, and it is kind of a symbiotic or maybe exploitative relationship where industry seeks to gain a certain cachet by being associated with art. But how do we see the evolution of art as a critique of industry, and how have all of you sort of brought that out in your work? We'll start with Ronnie.
So, your question was how art is used as a critique of industry? Yeah. As far as my work is concerned, I don't know if it qualifies as something which is critical of industry per se, but this is more about the larger apocalypse that we are probably facing. This was done in Jharkhand, and this area basically produces the best coking coal in India, which is used for steel production. That's the reason that people have constantly tried to grab control over Jharkhand historically from the Britishers to, before Britishers, it was the Maharaja of Jharkhand who had control of coal there. Then it was the Britishers, and after that, it went to private players. From then, it became nationalized, and it's still nationalized, but there is a certain kind of a pressure to sell everything. But the larger point that I was trying to make is every organization or institution has basically failed in Jharkhand, from the Britishers till the time now, when it has, so many hands have changed. Nothing has really worked, either for the people who live there, for the environment. So there's always been a certain kind of a power shift, but beyond that, people who are, who we call laborer workers, they are still the same. Their journey 100 years before what it was. There were certain occasions when it became worse, but significantly nothing really has happened. What the work also tries to look at is the shifting landscape in these places where, the mining is going on, and the medium of photography, it becomes interesting because you can never go back and photograph the same thing. It constantly changes. And that's why, it felt kind of sort of special when I was shooting there. But in the last 1 decade, in a different context to answer your question, in the last decade, we have seen a lot of work which is, kind of critical of industry. But I'm not very sure. I'm not very sure what we are going to achieve being inside the white cube, because we don't have audiences. And beyond the point, I really don't know how much impact our work has, honestly. Some of us can have a career out of this. We can really make, strong, weak, whatever work out of these places and situations. But at the end of the day, if you think about impact, then we are not really moving anywhere, is what I personally think. And this is something that, bothers me also, when I find my work inside the white cube. But for me personally, there is no other way, because this is the only thing that I know. And maybe these conversations can, initiate a few more things, and people can start discussing. And especially if it's a public museum, then even better.
I think the idea is also to look at coal, carbon, through different lenses, and kind of unpeel the many layers around it. And I think art as well, through its many ways of documenting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Fire Continuum, your work, and what the central themes of that are?
So, when I work, there's no specific agenda as such that, this is a thing that I want to talk about. It's not really that. It's more about experiences. Of course, it's also about the medium of photography, and these reasons are very rooted within the medium of photography, which nobody cares about, so it really doesn't matter. But at the same time, as photographers, we're also trying to sort of do a few things in this kind of specific time. With this work, what I tried to do was to look at landscapes in a vertical format, whereas the masters have always looked at landscapes horizontally. Today, the kind of images we consume every day, it's all vertical on the phone. So they were all taken on phone. When I printed them, they were kind of very smaller in size, where people can come close and have a look at the prints, which is very different experience from a slideshow going in the back, which is not the best way to see this work, just to give a glimpse of what it is. So this is what it is, and as I said, it's about it's about dust and smoke and
the continuous fires of Jharkhand, right, which
Yeah.
have been burning and smoldering for 100 years.
Yes. So it's kind of a unique place where there is an underground fire for 100 years, and nobody really knows how to control it. On the other hand, what they do is they try to kind of manipulate it because, so coal deposits are in flat, they are flat and long. There are different beams, so seam 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are long flat deposits. And the Britishers knew open cast mining, which is this. They didn't do it primarily because of a couple of reasons. One is they wanted to get the best quality, which is at the bottom seam, to get that. Number 2 is they thought they'll put people on the land above. They'll give them housing there. And the other thing is they thought that it will pollute, so they didn't do open cast mining. The future mining which is going to happen is also going to be underground. The massive scale mining in many places in the world are all underground now. They are not open cast. And these flat deposits of coal, when you dig, it's gone. Right, as I said, you can't go back and photograph you can't take the same picture again. So if there is another village, say 50, 100 meters away from where you're mining right now, how do you remove all the people from there? The traditional way would be to give them certain kind of a compensation, housing, rehabilitation, this, that, the other. Now what you can do is you can just take some burning coal and you can say that you are fighting the fire. You take the coal, you dump it near the village. In a week, the village you want empty is on fire. And when your house is on fire, you got to run. Right. So it's a very weird place, and I can continue talking about it. It's very surreal in a way.
Yeah.
Say, when there are mines, you can't have, where people are living, you can't be blasting within a certain
Perimeter
distance.
of the...
But it continues to happen. Say, for example, there was a photograph of a child just in front of their house. And when the blasting happens, there are these huge rocks which fall on them. It's like rain,
A rain of fire.
Yeah, rain of big rocks which fall from the sky. Once it happened that one guy was watching a match in his house, and it was some like India-Pakistan kind of a match. Inside his house, the blasting happens at a particular time of the day, at 1 p.m. or something. And there's a big siren which is like, okay, now the blasting is going to happen. So he's watching the match in his house. The blasting happens, a big rock comes, his TV breaks. He picks it up, he goes to the official's office and says that, this is what has happened. So the situation is quite unbelievable.
Right.
But more than their lives, what I have tried to do is to look at this environment which is constantly changing, and we simply don't care.
Right. No, and to your question about why are we doing this, I think this documentation is important. I think the white cube does have a role to play in however change happens. Shantamani, tell us about your work a little bit and talk about, what your relationship with coal is. and how you've tried to sort of, delineate that in your work.
Yeah. To answer your first question about corporate and
Right.
the
And the
relationship,
critique of
yeah.
art.
So I would like to comment on that. In a sense, if you look at the mainstream art history throughout the civilization, human civilization, art is always used to project a certain kind of agenda, or it's a propagation. So it is part and parcel of it for many, many centuries. But despite of all of that, the human intelligence has worked very well to subvert that meaning and to create another narration that actually gives you the sight of common man's way of living, cultures, his interest and all of that. The biggest example is that very Sistine Chapel where Michelangelo puts his portrait into that skinned this thing. How you actually change the whole meaning. So therefore, we are always in the middle of these huge power and financial structures. It's all about how we navigate this and still retain certain amount of practice and interest that what we want to express through our medium. This is something that we have to learn. It's not like it is given to you. All that freedom and then the finance is given to you to be in that space. I came into working with charcoal because I was very interested in using a particular medium that can speak of my time. Carbonization is something that last 20 years we have been bombarded with issues of global warming, carbon, pollutions and things like that. And for me, it was a way of investigating what actually that means. Because most of the time, the kind of information that is come to us is through media, unless it's a subject that you study deeper. So I really didn't want it to, and then the more number of times it's repeated in front of you, you start believing that you're part of it. And that is the way you create certain kind of opinion, a collective opinion. I didn't want it to get into that. I really wanted to examine what it means to use these terminologies, so therefore as a sculptor, my first initial reaction was to just sit in front of this material, to start working with it, try and see how you move this material to become a medium of expression. And what do I talk with that by end of that once it starts communicating was a process that I needed to go through. So these works are basically my own exploration of the role of carbon, what it means to be with it, how do I actually change this material to become a medium, and how do I communicate to people. Communication is very important, and my work becomes a platform to talk to people, to connect to people. That is what it is. Yeah.
Does it ever seem to you that there is a dichotomy in using something which is in some sense cruel to the earth from which it is extracted, to the people who are doing the work of extraction, and use it to create something of beauty?
See, I don't know whether I can take that position or I can judge that, because none of us actually can escape that space. For me, I believe that understanding actually can change. The deeper understanding of that material is something that can change the way I look at the material or the way I use the material. For me, all last 10 years is about how the issues of carbon and issues of the negative aspect of carbon. But for me, getting into bamboo charcoal, that is when I realized this material is also used for filtration. Your air and your water is filtered through this. The carbon is also a solution. Carbon is also the reason why we are alive.
Yeah,
it's fueled.
We are all carbon.
Yes, our imagination is fueled by it. It represents everything that we believe. So in that sense, I really wanted to understand this material. Do I create a certain amount of violence? Yes, we are part of that violence. We are part of that depletion of resource. It's inevitability. It's about how carefully we navigate that space is important.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll come to Arnika. In your work as a curator, and are there some works that, would you first like to talk about, the critique of industry in art, in Indian art specifically, and also talk about any specific works that you have in mind that kind of, bring this narrative together in the visual form?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think I would like to take off from where Shantamani also left it off, to think a little bit more about what do we mean when we say art and industry? What is the relationship? And I think in my work, what I was very interested in my academic work was the relationship between capital, funding structures, art institutions, and the impact of art making for artists who come from financially less privileged backgrounds, and how this entire system pans out for them. And I was thinking while we were talking about this question earlier already that it's a lot of expectation towards the artist to actually critique these things, because the opportunities in India are still relatively little, and a lot of corporate funding, a lot of money for the arts comes from exactly those companies that we're talking about. And I guess especially then if we're looking at the work of younger artists, it's a little unfair to expect them to go all out and critique. And I think one of the artists who's very interesting in that sense is Prabhakar, whose work we're looking at here. Prabhakar Pachputi is from a mining background. His parents, his father, his grandfather were working in mining. And he was the first in the family who said, I want to do something else, and I want to try out other things. And he failed his exams, I think, and then he managed to do a degree in fine arts, and eventually went to Baroda. And the images we're looking at here is his first solo show at Clark House Initiative in Bombay, an art space that doesn't exist anymore, but that was known for supporting artists from marginalized backgrounds. And this was the first show that I also saw at Clark House and of Prabhakar's. And that was in 2012, in which he really challenges the idea of the white cube and what the white cube is. Clark House Initiative was already doing that as a space as well by inviting artists to live there rather than just show there. And maybe you can go back to the last slide once more, but what he actually did is that he blackened the entire space. Basically then drew these very narrative paintings on these walls that tell the stories of miners, where often body parts are replaced by tools. That's something that still interests him very much. But at this time, he was very much drawing on walls. So all his work was basically murals, which allowed him to travel to different places. And I think that at that point was a very smart thing to do, because that allowed him to travel internationally, that allowed him to travel to other places. A lot of cultural places around the world are based on former mining spaces. I'm from Germany. In Germany, that is happening a lot. The last coal mine there shut a couple of years back, and those are all spaces now for biennials and so on. And he basically had the chance to travel across the world, draw on these walls, and meet with people in these places and talk about the abandonment of these mines. And I think he spoke about this a long time ago, that his dream is eventually to go back to his village at some point and build a museum there and connect all of these internationally collected stories of miners in that museum in Maharashtra. At the same time, I wanted to come back to this idea of critiquing. It was a couple of years back that a very prominent art magazine in India invited Prabhakar to show his work, and this magazine is funded by one of the big corporates, which business is based on mining. And Prabhakar's work is critical of that in what we are looking at. And you can go to the next slides if you like. And at the same time, I think what's happening here is almost like a co-option. So from critiquing, we have moved on to something else here, and artists are actually being invited to show their work in those spaces. And at the same time, there is not really a conversation coming up in that space at that moment. But at the same time, I think artists need to get by as well. So you kind of like have to take up the opportunity.
No, those are some, I mean, you bring up some amazing, wonderful tensions in the entire, in that space and in those relationships. Okay, coming to Dheeraj, Dheeraj, your work has been as an academic studying sort of, the socio-cultural, socio-political milieu of mining in India. How do you interpret, the relationship between art and industry?
Thanks, and let me first thank Science Gallery to host it, and it has been wonderful to have something like this after 2 years of terrible COVID experience, which disrupted in so awful manner so many things. So many people we lost, and so many struggles went on to come to this stage. And all, I would say, have been intimately connected to what you call black coal, what do you call?
Black coal, white cube.
Black coal, white cube. In many ways, this paradigm has helped human civilization to come through all this. And this is what I'm going to quickly say, that how it is interconnected. See, there are broadly 4 narratives on this subject. 2 laudatory narratives say that, 1, the industrialization and especially mining industry produced prosperity, brought about prosperity. In fact, there is an argument made by many scholars now which says that especially the use of coal in modern time from the late 18th century and early 19th century onwards created a huge, great divergence between those countries which managed to secure modern economic growth, that is the industrial revolution on one side, and those countries which could not for next 150 years or 200 or so. Related to that, there is another narrative which says that actually mining industry, and especially the coal industry, also laid the foundation for establishment of democracy. There is a very famous scholar, Timothy Mitchell, in his book Oil and Democracy, says that actually the coal industry, development of the coal industry and the mining communities in particular, contributed to the establishment of democracy and the politics of redistribution by using their collective organized political power. Now, opposed to these 2 celebratory narratives, we do have now 2 denunciatory, I would say, but at the same time, critical self-realization. And Ronnie presented before us one of these 2 critical self-realizations, that displacement, dispossession is also part and parcel of this story as it passes through different stages. And the stage that Ronnie captured through his photographs in the Jharkhand goldfield is the stage in which massive dispossession through displacement. And displacement is not just the taking away of land, displacement is also the way nature is organized, the way nature is violated in course of securing this source of prosperity. And the second is, of course, all of you are aware, climate change, that how the mining industry, especially the fossil fuel producing mining industry, contributes to climate change. And therefore, there is an urge to go beyond this through renewable energy, through nuclear energy and all that. However, if we closely look at the experiences of mining communities and the way these experiences have got expression in arts, and the arts produced by artists outside of mining communities, and what I am going to show you, the arts produced by the mining communities themselves, would tell us their diverse ways of coming to terms with it. The diverse ways of coming to terms with, including their appreciation of what they have achieved through this, and also their critical adjustment with the problems that they routinely confront. So can you go to the first slide where I have a small folk song? Yeah. So one of my attempts in the last 20 years has been to collect folk songs from the mining communities, and I managed to collect 3. I am sharing here one of them. And this is composed by the mine worker, fortunately a literate mine worker in the 1950s when India had just 16% literacy, and a mine worker being literate was very rare. And his name was Pilu Deswal, and I interviewed his daughter-in-law 20 years back, and his grandson. And of course, it is in Chota Nagpuriya language, and I translated all. I have written about it. But the point that I want to emphasize here is that such a folk song is, of course, a literary creation, and which expresses their social life, their work culture, but criticism of the labor management relationship, criticism of the problem of usury, etc. But the most important thing is that how this artistic expression, that is the composition of a folk song, is to them very much part and parcel of work. They sing this folk song in below ground mining work, which is taking place 2,000 feet down the earth, 1,000 to 2,000 feet down the earth. That is the average depth of the below ground Jharkhand coal field, which is one of the oldest mines. So one would say that there is a conventional notion shared in the metropolis that mining work is very harsh, hazardous, inhuman, difficult, etc. But this song would tell you that how they humanize this workplace and make it bearable, and through this kind of literary creation, through this kind of artistic expression. And they do it whenever they find a break, and the breaks are very frequent in case of the mining, whenever the explosion is organized, wherever the some mechanical breakdown takes place, etc. Can you go to the next? Now, there are 3 more things I want to draw your attention to. That critical, as your question related to the evolution of critical lens on the connection between art and industry. This is one of the few statues, public statues of mining person you will find in India. In fact, this is the first statues of any working person, and in this case, mining person, was installed in the Indian subcontinent. Outside of China, it was the first in Asia. It was a big news at that point of time. And this is in Dhanbad district, which is the headquarters of the Jharkhand coal field, installed by the public sector, BCCL, Bharat Coal Coking Limited, after the nationalization. And this critical lens was brought by the infusion of socialist realism, which nationalization of the mines had introduced to the public life of the mining communities from the 1970s and onwards. And this, of course, celebrates a muscular, hardworking man who is a mine worker. But you will see this man is a very third world country man in this critical lens. This man is still using scientific safety tool, but doing manual work. You will see the bamboo basket, right, and you will see the shovel, this is still labor-intensive work being done in third world country. So this was the critical lens, that where labor-intensive manual work, along with the scientific equipment provided by the nationalized industry, was the underbelly of this prosperity and democracy that India was securing in this period. Can you go to the next?
One question, Dheeraj. When was the statue put up?
This is the 1970s.
In the 1970s.
Yeah.
So before that, there was no commemoration as such of the
working person,
of the labor.
Yes, no, not at all. This is at that time. This was a big news that outside of China, it was the first in Asia. whole of the Asian continent.
And since then, have there been more such memorializations?
I haven't shown here, but there is another statue of working women in Dhanbad which is recently replaced. That working women carrying forest product on the head. That is recently replaced. Now, this is the second crucial experience, that is the memorialization of the martyrdom. And this martyrdom is not on the border, which is so much now we are enchanted with and promoting warfare, etc. This is the martyrdom that the mining communities ascribe to the persons who die in the course of work, in work hazards, in accidents. And they memorialize it by setting up memorials like this. This accident had happened in 2006, and I had written a small piece in Caravan at that point of time, where more than 50 workers had died in this accident. And this is memorialized, and they commemorate every year this in September, where a large gathering takes place. Now you will wonder that what is the significance? And in fact, you had asked me that what is the significance of this kind of memorialization? Through this memorialization, they promote a discourse of mine workers being the martyrs for this country, for this democracy, for this prosperity, for this main source of energy on which Indian industries and the economy rest on. And at the same time, they also claim that they deserve respect. They deserve recognition for their sacrifices, which otherwise are often ignored outside of the mining communities. So this is a resistance against the denigration, against the invisibilization, and making it as the site to remind everyone that how safety and health to be the chief concern in the policy making. Can you go to the next?
One question, Dheeraj. Who made that moment? Was it done by the workers or by the company? I mean, did the workers pull together?
This is primarily under the pressure of the workers' collective unions.
Okay, the unions put
Yes.
pressure on the company
Yes.
to.
Yes.
But was there any, impetus within the company to do that, or it was a kind of a demand from the workers that they not be invisibilized?
It is on demand of the workers. In fact, if it is in the hand of the management, then most of the managers won't like to have something like that, because none of them were so far even punished for this accident. And all this started in 1975 when for the first time such a memorial was set up, when Chas Nala disaster had happened, on which there is a famous movie Kala Patthar following that Chas Nala disaster. So the first memorial of this kind was set up following that accident nearby that mines. And if you see the names inscribed on this memorial of all 57 mine workers who died, you will find names of all kinds of caste group. And actually this is the true plural Indian society, where you will find the people coming from all different communities and social groups who have died on the same spot, though performing different jobs. And most of them, of course, Dalits and the other backward caste groups. Can you go to the next? Yeah, this is in the series of memorialization, and this is a story that currently I am writing a biography actually, a book-length biography of a person whose name none of you would have heard, Sadhan Gupta. And this is the memorial of Sadhan Gupta, built by the Muslim community. A Hindu man, Sadhan Gupta, a trade union leader, who bore 20 years of life imprisonment in 1952 in the aftermath of a long struggles of the working people in the Jharia coalfield, and then got released after serving almost 17 years in jail in 1969, and then again again participated in the workers' collective struggle. And the Muslim community in this area set up this, and they hold a memorial collective gathering in memory of Sadhan Gupta, combining both Muslim and Hindu every year on 14th of October, or 14th or 15th of October, when he expired in 1969. Now, only one, I would say, real thing that Gangs of Wasipur captures about the Jharia coalfield and Dhanbad is the fact that Gangs of Wasipur eschewed from communalization of Hindu-Muslim in that movie. And that is the fact of the matter in the mining communities,
Right.
where communalism did not rip them apart. And that's why you can see the existence of this kind of memorial, where a very committed trade union leader who died and whose memorial set up as the tomb or as the burial by the Muslim community and celebrated by the combination of both Hindu and Muslim. This, now you will say that how it is a critical lens on art. Now, very few laudatory cultural art produced by the industry, produced by the established corporate houses or by the nationalized company would bring to us this kind of artistic expression, creative expression that the mining communities have produced, and they maintain them in their routine life. And through Black Coal and White Cube, I wish that we would be able to project them as alternative traditions that Indian society continue to have. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dheeraj. Actually, that, my next question was going to be about, self-expression versus artistic expression. And we'll go around again. Or I'm coming to you, Shantamani, actually, because I know we discussed this at some length earlier about, this outside lens that artists, photographers, academics, curators bring to these lives, right? And so what, versus the self-expression that Dheeraj also talks about, like the mining community having its own songs. What is the value of this outside lens? And do you think that an outside lens sometimes overtakes, the self-expression of those communities? I mean, is it a form of appropriation, or is it necessary? What are the tensions between that? Who gets to tell this story? Who should be telling this story?
That's a very big question and a responsibility. Yeah, I know self-expression is very important, especially when it comes from the location of the community, from within the community. That does, some of the artists we see, they are children of miners, the mining labor, and they have their own personal stories that are already in the mainstream art practices of India. But people like us, okay, I'm not necessarily so much interested in the human story, but I'm interested in the material. But how do one look? The artist location is something becomes very important for me. Is it that like the age-old concept of artists actually reflecting the society, they are the mirrors of the society, therefore you are actually placed somewhere else, not in the social structure itself? But from my point of view, when I look at it, most of the issues that we're dealing, it is everybody's problem. It is not one particular community's problem at this point. The issues of coal, the issues of environment is literally everybody's issue at this point. It's very important for an artist to locate within that issue and within that community and see what actually happens. Especially for me, that I'm very influenced by this photographer called Sebastiano Salgado. The way he locates himself, stays with the community, becomes part of it, and kind of documents and then use photography as a medium to show what they're going through and what is the story, of this whole development idea that we have, is very interesting. When it comes to my art, actually, I am locating somewhere else. I'm locating the space where I am living in. There, the coal and charcoal and everything that the product of carbon is very much relevant at this point. And we are also the consumer of it. It's not the miners who are consuming all of that product. We are the consumers. And each time that an idea of development or lifestyle that I make really affects a remote part of a country or remote part of the world, and this connecting dot is very important for me. So my exploration of this particular material and trying to understand this material, coal and the carbon that is represented, all the material that represents carbon, is a way of really understanding all that happens around it. The politics, the economic structure, the human story, and also the environment.
The environment.
Yeah, the environmental issue. So all of that we believe and we are connected is somewhere, that is where I locate. So in a way, there is, even for an artist who's spending that much time, there is no outsider gaze. In some sense, you also locate within that.
That's a great answer, actually. Ronnie, you've spent many years in Jharkhand and photographing. What forms of self-expression did you see there? I mean, was there even space for self-expression? Did you find? I mean, or is it too much of like a quotidian struggle? And as an outsider, what was the reception towards you, like a person who's going around with a camera taking photos of, the mines, the burning land, the White Ambassador? That's a very interesting story, by the way. I want you to maybe talk a little bit about the symbolism of the White Ambassador. Can we go to Ronnie's photograph of this White Ambassador atop sort of hillock? So yeah, I mean, what have you observed? What was the reaction to you, and how do you place yourself in this?
I don't care if I'm perceived as an outsider. I know I am an outsider. But as far as self-expression is concerned, I think, it's a necessity for any person living in this world. It doesn't have to be that they are artists, but they have to come out with certain creative ways of doing something. For example, the dargah the memorial that they have made for somebody they deeply love doesn't need to be built by a great sculptor or they wanted something. So this piece of expression, whatever you call it, came from need. And we have always done stuff like that. For example, if there is a small child in the home, and if the mother is away, and it's the father who is looking at the kid for a couple of days, and the baby is not sleeping, the person has to instantly come up with a story so that the baby sleeps. So it's sheer necessity. You have to come up with something or the other, But for people like us who are in the business of making art, for us it's slightly different. And I can talk for myself. For me, it doesn't matter if I'm an outsider or an insider. End of the day, it's also important to look at things from distance. It is quite impossible to go very close. And I don't know how to balance it. And is it intrusive? What she was saying about Salgado, that he spends long time with communities, with all due respect to him and his work, and I've grown up watching Salgado. I don't know if I should be spending that much time with a community, right? Why is the question, I don't know if I should be spending lot of time inside a person's house, because this is a person I'm photographing or filming for anything. There is a certain seriousness which gets attached to your project if you spend a lot of time. But in reality, these things. Is it on? Hello. I think it's on. Hello. So yeah, so I'm saying it doesn't really matter, and these are all different kind of constructs. A poet doesn't go to a person's house to write something. You know, there are great writers that we have grown up, reading, and they didn't have to go out. But as photographers, the biggest challenge
Poetry
is
is fiction, and fiction is fiction, and
Yeah.
photography is also documentation, right?
Not really, not really. I mean, there is, of course, I mean, and that's the biggest challenge, that the biggest contradiction of photography is this illusion of reality that you represent. But in end of the day, it means nothing. The kind of responsibility you should have as an artist in fiction to deal with your characters with compassion and love and empathy and all of the good things, whatever. The same thing applies for documentary, So as far as responsibility is concerned, it's the same in fiction, in documentary. So for me, this is not important. What is important is who represents whom and who's getting access into a certain kind of a community.
Absolutely. Access.
I don't know if a black photographer would be welcomed in India in any community with open arms. So we don't live in a black and white world, and it's very complicated. And about this ambassador car, I mean, it was always looked at as a symbol of modernity. But in the Jharkhand coalfields, and I spend some time with people who steal coal, and they work from very early in the morning. So whenever they see this white ambassador, which is like this symbol of Indian
Authority,
bureaucracy
right?
and authority, whatever, so they flee the mines. They run away. They hate this car. They don't like it. They see this car and they think that there is trouble. And, in a very weird way, this is also, so you can see the car is very far. So it's what they see. But of course, I mean, I don't live their lives. So I can't be, asking for more, whatever, saying that, oh, I spend time, and, these things don't matter, end of the day. I could have done the work in 1 day or 10 years. It's all the same, actually. What is important is what's the politics of the work, what's for any artist, what the person is trying to achieve beyond anything else. Yeah.
And what were you trying to achieve?
I mean, again, this is going to be like a long one, but of course, I mean, it's a very
In short.
larger. There are many things. One of them is this recurrent theme of violence that I was talking about, and being in a constant sort of, shifting with the blasting minds and what happened to these people, along with the landscape, which is ever changing. And this is the same everywhere else. Wherever you see natural resources in any part of the world, be it Brazil, be it somewhere in Africa, there is a certain desire to sort of scavenge everything, And as artists, we also do the same, probably. That we go into communities and we just take.
Anika, is there anything you wanted to add to, the whole discourse of where a photographer should be placed, especially in a violent this is also a form of violence, like, violence upon the earth, upon the people, where they should be placed. I mean, there's this whole debate about, you remember that AFP photo about, the AFP photographer photographing a Somali child and, with the vulture close by, like, so, it raises this moral question of, what is the photographer's job, to document that reality or to protect that child and save it and take it to the nearest shelter or camp. Where do you stand on that?
That's a very big question. I have a feeling we need another panel discussion for that. But maybe I can backtrack a little bit and go back to what Ronnie was talking about earlier. And just keeping in mind that I think all of us have like various degrees of alienation from what we're actually looking at. And we're all speaking from different standpoints. And I think in my research and my work, I always found this idea of giving visibility problematic, because even that speaks from a position of power, that who is allowed to give visibility and to what. And I was also thinking that everything we're talking about here is closely related to the question of caste, and in academia there is this idea of building a category and discussing Dalit aesthetics as an aesthetic category, which I found very challenging in my research. And I was always thinking in terms of that it's limiting in a way, and we've seen that in literature to a certain degree. But if you expect people to speak about their lived experiences all the time, and you expect them to talk in a certain visual narrative, then you narrow it down, and you narrow down options of what you want to do. Maybe you are an artist who comes from a working class background, who comes from a miner's family, but you actually would want to talk about nature and beauty. And
or you want to be a fashion photographer, I mean.
Sure, yeah, or that. And I think that's what we in our work have to be quite conscious about. What are these expectations we're creating towards a visual language of a group of people, and what they are free to express, also to come back to the question of self-expression. And I've completely forgotten where I wanted to go with this. I wanted to think a little bit more about in terms of access as well, and maybe Ashank, you can go back once more to the PowerPoint that I had given you, and wanted to talk about Birender Yadav's work. It's towards the end of these slides, and it's actually interesting because Birender is from Uttar Pradesh, and his family migrated to Dhanbad when he was very young, and he grew up there. His father is a blacksmith who works in the coal mining industry, and he realized very early that Birender was really good at drawing. And he took the help of his son to make diagrams and to create the molds for the tools for the miners. And when Birender was 15 years old, his father said, okay, let's work with this a little bit more, and sent him to Benares to get an arts degree to refine his skill in a way. And then Birender had the experience of studying fine arts, and came back to his father and basically said, I don't want to work in the coal mines, I'm an artist now. I mean, he went on, he was applying for grants and so on. It was a bit difficult because BHU was not the kind of university that provided him with the kind of exposure that allowed him to get grants. He spent some time in Delhi. He was turned away at galleries, and being basically told that the space is not for him. So I think the violence that the art world often inflicts on people who come from these backgrounds and seek self-expression to a certain degree, and at the same time go through these various moments of rejection, of whatever it is, not being able to return to where they were coming from, but also not finding a space in the art world as we have built it in a way, is something that, yeah, I find quite difficult sometimes.
Just the last question before we wrap up, and we, I mean, throw open the, mic to the audience if they have any questions. Actually, I want to really talk a little bit. I mean, Dheeraj briefly mentioned gangs of Wasipur, and I know that Ronnie also has some thoughts on, so I just wanted to talk, when we say art and industry, there's also pop culture as a part of, what we mean as art today. I think we can't discount popular culture as well. But I mean, you had some thoughts about that movie. What did you've spent time in Jharkhand, you have dealt with, you said that you have, interacted with people who steal coal and, the mafias. So what did you think that movie got right or wrong, about that whole?
It's
Apart
of course,
from all
I
the
mean,
foul language, of course, I'm sure that was very accurate.
No, that's very accurate. But I'll answer this, but at the same time, very quickly from where Dheeraj left about that memorial that people had made for this guy. Yeah, Sadhan Gupta. What constitutes as a worker? I mean, there's also in India, there are various institutions, and there is a institutionalized way of looking at everything. Who do we call a worker? Who do we? It's a very bureaucratic system that we have. Our laws are great. It's not bad. Environment, forest, all of that. And for example, if an elephant or a tiger attacks or eats your livestock, you get a certain kind of a compensation from the government. Not many countries in the world have these laws, by the way. Say, in the context of Jharkhand, these guys in my photographs, aren't they workers? If they die, they'll not get any compensation. If a person from BCCL dies, his family members will get a job. In a jungle, if there are tigers or leopards or whatever, and if there is a barricade that you cannot enter this area, but communities of fishermen have gone in these areas for centuries to go, and they have done fishing, and they get eaten up, then they don't get the compensation.
Because they are poachers in some
Yes,
sense.
so this is also, I mean, while we talk about climate change, environment, we also need to talk about the larger development model that we are using, and also the way these institutions have worked and served us, the modern society, mostly, which leaves out a large group of people, and we just simply don't care about them, what happens to them. For example, in Gangs of Wasipur, there is a sequence where this corrupt person who gets a tender of filling the underground mines with sand. He gets the assignment, but he goes on a scooter. It's not really untrue. Things like that have happened. And in Jharkhand, as I said, this is like an open cast mine that we have right now. And then there were these underground mines which existed during the British period. When nationalization happened, BCCL wanted all these underground mines to be filled with sand. So tenders were released, but because of normal nexus that we have in India, people took the money, they didn't do the job. So these underground mines still exist. Today, if you want, you can go to these mines, underground mines, where the iron, or they call it Loha Mafia, they go. So underground, when you go, you can find ambulances all in the dark. You will find little temples of Kali. You'll find a little small hospital. You go a little ahead, you find a little pond. And if methane comes, they call it khuni dhua. So they go under the water, let the gas pass, they come out, and they basically go to steal these iron beams. But if they die, there is no compensation, obviously. So it's a very, and there is no one to remember them, right? So that image that he showed is so touching, but at the same time, it leaves such a large population in Jharia that it felt very bizarre that all of these guys are working. So we don't say people who steal coal, we say coal pickers. And when these people die, and there is subsidence all the time, right? So there is no memorial for them. There is no compensation that you can give them. There's nothing, absolutely nothing for them. As if they don't exist.
Anybody wants to add something? Anything left unsaid, untouched upon? Do we have any questions from the audience?
I have a question. Please come forward and
Thanks for a very insightful session. I learned a lot. My question is to Ronnie and perhaps to Dheeraj. Have you seen the lives of people around these workers being documented or memorialized? Doctors, for example, that have treated coal miners, teachers that have helped children come up and perhaps move out of that. It's just struck me that perhaps that's important, and I was curious if that's been documented or memorialized somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks. This is, I would say, very interesting inquiry. And the person who helped me to do preparation of this documentation that I showed you in very brief is a teacher. And his name is Mantu Mahto. He is a headmaster of one of the schools in Murli Colliery, which is one of the mining areas. So actually teachers, along with some doctors, played a very, very significant role, I would say, in bringing about some very useful transformation. I would, of course, I gave you just one example here. One of the important legislations that came into existence very late in India after independence, that was the compensation of occupational diseases. In the whole of colonial period, there was the opinion maintained by the government, of course the British government, that Indians don't suffer from occupational disease. At the time, Americans, British, Germans suffered from occupational disease, and they had legislations to compensate. And that opinion precluded the adoption of similar move in India. But from 1946 onwards, which I have studied, some of the self-conscious, publicly oriented doctors in India took independent inquiries in the mining areas on health conditions of the mining communities and published reports. One of the persons on whom I have briefly written, Khanolkar, none of Indians know that he published the first report in 1946 and submitted to the committee, S.R. Deshpande committee during the colonial time in 1946, just a year before independence, indicating that Indian mining communities are suffering from occupational diseases. Khanolkar was British returned doctor in Bombay, and in India, if you search his Wikipedia, known for being the pioneering cancer doctor. Many years back when I was in Sweden, I received a call from one scholar from Europe asking that you have written about Khanolkar that he submitted a report in 1946 to the Deshpande committee suggesting that Indians are suffering from occupational diseases in mining areas. How do you know? Because even the Khanolkar's family member don't know. And then I became more interested in this subject and found that there were a few more doctors who actually published reports in 1956, 57. Finally, Government of India got compelled to bring a legislation in favor of compensating the people suffering from occupational diseases. So that's how significant role some of these publicly conscious and publicly empathetically oriented doctors have played a role, and teachers, of course. Some of the leading trade union leaders were actually the teachers. But let me just conclude with 2 sentences on the question that our panelists have reflected on, outsider and insiders. I would say that I would reject this question.
Okay.
Because this is a conspiratorial discourse. Conspiratorial discourse that the state and the management came up with at some point of time to perpetuate exploitation and oppression by maligning the image of those who are coming from outside and trying to champion the cause of improvement, reform, emancipation, etc. If you talk to the working population, they are least interested in whether who is outsider and insider. They are interested in what meaningful and useful things you can talk about if you are going to document it and present it. How meaningfully you can influence the policies. And this representation could be done by whether insider or outsider. And both insider and outsider can do wrong and meaningful representation. So my opinion is that we need to move beyond this conspiratorial discourse, which actually limits the possibility of intersubjective connection that human being is capable of establishing. Thank you.
I think, this whole insider-outsider lens is also, the discourse is also a function of privilege. We have the privilege to sit and discuss, what is insider and outsider lens. But I think for people, living those lives, yeah, like you rightly said, they probably don't care. Ronnie, you wanted to say something?
I just want to add a small thing, which is, to answer the gentleman's question is, of course, Dheeraj and all are much more serious researchers. Even though we're called documentary photographers, we hardly document anything. We reflect, respond, react to things. We don't work as ethnographers. But the doctors and, as he said, that the teachers, mostly the teacher of a small town, small village, plays a big role in many decisions in the community, and they have been at the forefront of unions, etc. Doctors also, one of the finest works have happened in all these places like mining and like this disease called pneumoconiosis, which happens because of the dust. In the tea gardens of Assam, your first malaria vaccine was made there in the tea gardens of Assam. Anyhow, but this outsider-insider question is, I just want to add that who in the Indian communities, who is the biggest outsider? Is the IAS officers. Where do they come from? They say, IAS officer from Rajasthan coming to Bengal in a village. What does he know about Bengal? And the exact opposite of that. And to put it into perspective, just because you talk about popular culture, if you look at this film, very brilliant film by a friend of mine, it's on Amazon called Sherni, and Amit Masurkar made a beautiful film, and I've publicly lauded the film as a very good film, and I really like it. The only thing that, and this is for people who have seen the film, the slight sort of thing which comes to my mind is in the film, there are these 2 leaders from the community who are villains, who are fighting for power and money. And your IS officer is the person who goes and fixes everything, right? And this is a recurring trend. No, but this is a recurring trend in Indian sort of Bollywood who want to who want to talk about social change and etc. So I don't understand that people who are not educated, who have not had the privilege of going to school, like your IS officer, have no stake in their community's development, but it's some IS officer who is eligible to do that. So it's basically your right to go in the assembly. That is also, I want to snatch it from you. And I want to give it, and you will hear this. Padha likha nahi hai, kaise mantri ban gaya? What is your problem? How can you say that a person who didn't go to school doesn't deserve to go to the parliament or the assembly?
I think we had another question.
Hi, this question is for Ronnie. Did people of Jharia have expectations from you, your work, your documentary, your photographs, which would be perhaps showcased in India or globally, that it would in some way bring attention to their problems, benefit them, save them, and basically to understand if they see value in art for activism? Because I'm sure you interacted with them, they would know that you're here to document their work. So did they have expectations from your work?
What was the last part of your question?
It's the same thing, to try to understand if they see any value in art for activism.
Okay, for Jharia, they don't care. Wherever TV goes and works, we don't want to work there because that whole area is corrupt, basically. People know what to answer, what to say. Any village, any situation, any event where something big has happened and the TV crew goes in, you cannot go work there. It's a problem. And simply they don't care. They're doing their daily things and you can just hang around and you can talk, and because they have no problems actually, honestly. They have no choice other than to shift along the blasting mines. We are looking at these situations as something which is disastrous, something which is risky, something which is not getting them enough money, something which affects the environment. For them, it's not. For them, this is the only thing that can keep their kitchen going. They have no option, but even if there is fire in their village, they'll have to shift somewhere else. Can they go to some other city? They can't. They are still dependent economically in the industry of coal in the city of Jharia. And I was telling them this story, that I had once interviewed a person who used to sort of, it's like a big mafia kind of person in Jharia, one of the guys who used to control the distribution and everything of coal and all of that. Later he got killed by AK-47 gun in whatever. And just to talk about violence, so the assignment to kill him was given to someone, and it was said that every bullet that you put on his body will pay you 1 lakh each for that. So I think he was hit by some 43, 44 bullets or something like that. Anyhow. So I asked him that there is a certain kind of a push to privatize everything. And what do you think about it? I asked this question to him, and he said that today, after the nationalization, after government has all control on coal, of course, a little part of it is being stolen. But if you privatize, and if it goes to some big corporate player, then you go back to the British era, where outside the mine, you build big boundaries where the normal people from the community can't go. There was a recent confrontation between an official and a person who is in politics in Jharkhand, where his vigilance team from this company, the vigilance team said, and if you understand Hindi, he said in Hindi, "Aapke log to wahan se koila chura rahe hain." And this politician, he got furious. He said, "How can you say koila chura rahe hain? कोयला तुम्हारे बाप का है. That's what he said. That does it belong to your father? It belongs to everyone. So in a very weird, bizarre way, even if it's a top-down sort of a situation, the whole city survives on this. The moment you drain it out, you go back to total control of one company, which this person is equating with the British Times.
Yeah, one of two companies in India today, probably. I think that sort of, oh, I think we have another question. Okay. Do we have time, Janvi? One question.
Hi, thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for sharing your practices with us. So I wanted to inquire after something that I guess was part of your presentation, but I guess because it's kind of like maybe contemplative, like speculation at best, like anyone can kind of like come up. But as like, so you did emphasize a lot about like the agency that like art, contemporary art kind of like gives people like from marginalized communities when they get into the mechanism. But at the same time, like, does it sometimes not hide more systemic problems? And to just lay ground for this, like 2 years, we've been having the whole issues in Goa, which has to do with like a railway line, the sanction of a railway line that's going to get like destroy a good amount of forest cover. And while a lot of focus has gone to the government, it's also like for the needs of 3 companies. So while 2 of them have a very notorious like reputation, one of them always appears to be more benevolent, but on just a very amateur Google search kind of like search, like I mean I just like found out that the more benevolent one has the worst sustainability profile like on an industry standard. But they're also the same guys who run the magazine, and so why do they seem like the nice guys and the other 2 not so much? And does this have to do with their patronage of the arts? The fact that they support artists, kind of, does that lend themselves to a certain profile that kind of like makes them seem better than the rest somehow? So then what is the role of like the art, the white cube and all its like adjoining, the entire ecosystem? What is the role of that in a lot of like disastrous like problems that they actually seem to be facing?
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I can just agree, I guess. And I think a lot of what patronage is about is the idea of giving back is also the idea of being in the right books of history to a certain degree. The issue, again, which is what I tried to say earlier, is that in India right now, there are not that many spaces that function outside the system. And I think a lot of us who may be here, me including, are somehow complicit in this system as well. And that is the art system. And I was talking to a friend this morning about this, that I think, for example, if you look at art protest in the US, or even if you look at Europe at the moment, and the question of where the funding is coming from, there are pockets being opened up which have perhaps less money. The money is not these huge amounts anymore, but the spaces are therefore quite interesting in a way. But that's something that hasn't really taken place here. And if we really look at it, I mean, the large, whatever the cultural sector is, it's always been in the hands of the privileged in India. And it still is right now. And maybe in a couple of years, maybe in a couple of decades, things will shift. I think there are these little spaces coming up here and there every now and then, but they're struggle, and especially after a time that we've just seen over the last couple of years, a lot of these spaces had to close down again. So the question then of responsibility, opening up these spaces, supporting these spaces, it all comes back to us to a certain degree as well. And I think that kind of responsibility lies with with everybody, whether you're part of the institutional system, whether you're outside of it, whether you're a visitor, an artist yourself, but to build a little bit of a different system outside the mainstream system is something that everybody would have to contribute. But it's just starting, I feel. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I felt very much in agreement what you said. So.
Yeah, I think the patronage of the arts does buy you a little bit of, it leads to whitewashing, yes. I don't think we can disagree with that. And so I think that kind of brings our discussion to an end. And thanks so much, all of you, for being here today and just being.
So when we sent out the first open call for carbon, our goal was to take ideas, concepts, identities around carbon that exist in our world and go deeper into them in order to show how carbon looks at the intersection of art, industry, state, knowledge making, sciences of different kinds. And I must say, this was fabulous. So, from Ronnie and his documentation of mines to Shantamani, who uses charcoal in her artwork, to Anika, who has been working and writing, doing her research and writing about artists who come from mining communities, but also blacken the white cube in more than one way, to Dheeraj's work in history and ethnography that brings to us not only what happens in the mines and the mining communities, but also the songs and the public art that grows around this carbon community. This is the kind of work that I think we would love to continue to do going forward. So please keep your eyes open for things that will happen around carbon in the city in the next months, or I should say probably the next year to come. So thank you, Shravanti, for pulling all of this together. But thank you, Ronnie and Dheeraj, for traveling to Bangalore to be with us. It's wonderful of you to give us the time. And thank you, Shantamani and Anika, for taking time in your busy schedules to again be with us this evening and have this wonderful conversation between art practices, knowledge-making practices, documentation practices, the sort of, the deep and entangled presence of knowledge and of, carbon in this particular case, in everyday life. Because, Gangs of Wasepur, Kala Patthar, a film that I saw when I was a very, very young child. I don't think I remember anything, but I remember going with my uncle. Things like this coming together and why that might actually matter, where science is in everyday life, the human, the natural, and the social sciences, as I began saying earlier this evening, and where art exists, right? And why these things why these practices converge, why these practices exist and what they mean to each other are things that we wish to work with in the years to come in this city. So for those of you who probably haven't met me before, there are many new faces. I'm Janvi Phalke. I'm leading the establishment of Science Gallery, Bengaluru. Thank you for taking the time this evening to be with us. Do give us your feedback. My fabulous team who are here, largely up there and up there, have made these lovely cards for you as well to take home. But do give us your feedback, because that is what will keep us on our toes, but that will also help us understand whether we are able to accomplish what we wish to. So thank you for your time this evening, and hope to see yourselves, your friends, your families, and many more in the year to come. Thank you again.